Okay. Hello, dear viewers. Welcome to episode 6, part 6 of my deep dive into Lamentations of the Flame Princess. Today we're going to dive into hirelings, henchmen, and retainers. And I'm also going to include the short chapter on personal finance and property management, just because it kind of ties into this topic a little bit. Um, I also think this is a good topic to get into because the players in my Lamentations of Elemental Evil campaign are thinking about hiring some people to help them uh, further explore now that they've survived their first foray into the moat house and have returned to the village of Hamlet. So, broadly speaking, once again, in this rule set, James Raggi has provided a very honest assessment of why retainers are important. You really don't see that in other iterations of the game. What I've seen is more like just broad strokes. Hey, your players may want to hire, somebody. Um, Raggi basically comes out and says, to be successful treasure seekers, you're going to need retainers. You're going to need people to help carry the treasure, carry the findings, right? I think he uses an example of hiring laborers to dig and uncover the entrance to a long forgotten tomb, that sort of thing. It really becomes sort of like a business, which again ties into this overarching philosophy that your character is taking on a new profession, and that profession is adventurer. And there's a business side to it, and this section of the player's core book, Rules of Magic, really gets into the bare bones of this. So there's an extensive list of retainers and what they can do for the PCs, and we'll explore that in a minute. But it's they have an impact. It's not just window dressing. You'll see that when we cover the list of henchmen and retainers that you can hire. There's loyalty and morale mechanics. What I like about this is, in prior iterations of the game, Dungeons and Dragons, there's just like a straight morale number for a sailor or a servant or a butler or a farmer or a fighter. Here, it really depends on how you negotiate and what you're promising the henchmen. Uh, that'll affect a roll and increase their loyalty. Um, yeah, and then like I said, there's a section on property management investment, and you could make your characters wealthy if that's what you want to include in your game. So retainers there's a chart in the book, and it provides a series of basic stats for the retainers. And I'm not talking armor class and hit points. It's what a daily wage would be versus a monthly wage, and then a live-in wage if these retainers are actually going to be staying at the estate or the property owned by the players. And if they are, they're going to have space requirements, some retainers of which will actually need an additional workspace. Think of like a blacksmith or a carpenter or something. um, what is interesting here is that there is built right into um, the mechanics of hiring a retainer and henchman. Uh, there's an expectation that there's going to be a negotiated contract. It is awesome. I think that really helps create a living world, a living, breathing world. The NPCs are not just an NPC. They have their own interests, and there's a game mechanics included in Lamentations of the Flame Princess to help bring that to the fore and help make your world come to life. So and here it is. Yeah, they are real people, right? So they're going to negotiate a death benefit. It's right in there, especially if they're being hired for dangerous missions. Retainers that are going to be hired to face danger. You're hiring a fighter, you're hiring a specialist, you're hiring a cleric or a magic user or a dwarf or something. These are going to probably be backup characters, and they will get a share of the treasure and experience points. That's just going to be what is negotiated. Interestingly, if there wasn't a death benefit negotiated, the rules state there's a 50% chance that a recently deceased retainer will have a family that's looking for that death benefit. So that kind of creates like an adventure opportunity, right? But again, real people with real concerns. I really like that. So then there is in the book the list of retainers and what they do. And interestingly, the accountant is probably going to be the most important one that you hire. If you have property, there each month there without an accountant, each month there's a 1 to 20% loss of funds due to the mismanagement, and an accountant would keep that from happening. And as you'll see later on in this presentation, the accountant can do even more for you. Alchemists. We haven't gotten to magic yet, but there is magical research rules. If you have an alchemist working for you, they can reduce research time by 1d6 days. Animal handlers are going to be required and necessary if your property has 5 animals or more. I'm currently watching the show Yellowstone, and they have, all that cattle, and now they're starting to breed horses. They need animal handlers in that show. I mean, it's a business, right? So, animal handlers will be required. You will have to hire one. If you have a lot of animals on your property. Similarly, armorer will be needed for every 50 men that you in your employ that is being used for war, just to maintain their equipment. Butler. This is interesting. If your household has 3 different types of retainers, let's say a coachman, a laborer, and some servants, 3 different types of retainers. Without a butler, their morale drops by 1. The butler is sort of like keeping everything organized. Raji uses the phrase chaos a lot. He uses that word and that phrase that maintaining these properties is a chaotic affair, and the butler is going to help you keep things managed. And there's other aspects, other henchmen that provide that same sort of bonus, and keeping morale from dropping. The coachman, basically, the coachman's not going to go out into the wilderness, but if you have, in a city, civilized area, the coachman will be on call and be the player's personal chauffeur. Craftsman, any trade, to whether it's a mason, carpenter, whatever, they'll probably need workspace. But your estate should hire at least one craftsman to be as the handyman, because you'll see that the handyman will stave off property value loss through just maintaining the property. Okay, so he's also got guards, and these that are distinct from mercenaries. The guards do not leave the property; they are there and act as bodyguards for the household members. So if you got some, a butler and some servants, a guard will, help protect them. But otherwise, I think they function essentially like mercenaries. Interestingly, there are guides that can be hired to help the players get through a wilderness travel, and actually provide 2-point bonus to the bushcraft roll to avoid getting lost. I thought this was actually quite generous. I probably would have limited it to 1-point bonus, but it's a 2-point bonus. So with a guide, you're very likely not to get lost. Henchmen, and here is the extra character. They're going to want to have their own share of the treasure, that sort of thing, but they have to be 2 levels lower than the players. And of course, if your player's character dies and he's got a henchman, could promote the henchman, and the henchman's now part of the team, right? Interesting thing for laborers. You're going to see this pop up quite a bit. For every 10 laborers, you're going to need a foreman who's paid twice the average wages needed. So that's an automatic thing. If you're looking for laborers, you're going to have a foreman who's going to cost a little bit more. Link Boy. I've never heard of this before until I started playing this game, but it's essentially a servant carries a torch, and they will not carry anything else. At least that's not what they're hired for. All right, here we go. Mercenaries. They have to be equipped by the PCs. To hire a company, you got to hire at least 20 at once. Mounted mercenaries cost 10 times the amount on the chart or on whatever you're planning on negotiating. For every 10 mercenaries, there is a sergeant who costs twice as much. Otherwise, the morale of the company drops by one. And for every 100 mercenaries, there is a captain paid 10 times the normal amount. Mercenaries are 0th level characters, sergeants are 1st level, and captains can be upwards to level 3 warriors, fighters. Um, Very expensive undertaking if you're going to start a mercenary company in Lamentations of the Flame Princess. But hey, you know, it's a good idea, especially if you're going to go into the Temple of Elemental Evil. Physicians receive double the normal hit points recovered when resting. Sailor, obviously they're for sailing vessels, and similar to the mercenaries, for every 10 you're going to need a mate or morale drops by 1. You'll need a captain to regardless of how many sailors you need for the ship, you're going to need a captain, otherwise morale will drop by 1. And then there's a navigator that can help avoid getting lost. I think if you're using the seamanship skill, alternative skill set from the Eldritch Cock playtest, I think it would the navigator would probably add 2 points to that, just like the guide would for bushcraft. There's oarsmen listed. They're essentially the same as sailors. Scholar reduces magical research on a project by 1d4 weeks. Very cool if you got a player that really wants to dive into the magic and have like a team researching magic for them. Servants. This is an interesting one. So if the players have property and they want to keep it maintained, they're going to need a servant for every 5 rooms and a servant for every 10 persons living on the property. That's very interesting sort of requirement for property ownership. I suppose if they didn't have the servant, their house would be dusty, have cobwebs, and just look like a mess. There is slaves that can be purchased by players, and they only count as half a person when calculating the budget of a property with respect to food and whatnot. And of course, if you have 10 slaves, you're going to need a slave master to oversee them. You can hire a spy, and they are always a long-term employee, and they will perform the tasks of another retainer, whatever it is you have them doing, but they're paid extra to snoop around and report back to the PCs. Very interesting if you want to get into politicking, which this the rule book doesn't really get into. In fact, in the property and finance section, it's short. It's like 2 to 4 pages, and it flat out states this is not about politics. This is just assuming the players are adventurers and they want to invest some money into property. It doesn't really get into the politics of whatever world you're going to be playing in. So, but a spy would be useful. And then Teamster. I love that he included Teamsters. These are the guys that help with pack animals, and they reduce a pack animal's encumbrance by 5 if they're the ones packing the gear. I like the fact that Teamsters are in here because it reminds me of like those Indiana Jones adventure movies, right? Where you just see all these guys with donkeys or whatever going into the jungle. I mean, there they are. Those are the people that you're going to hire to help you get to the adventure locale and walk away with all the treasure that you found. So that's cool that it's been included in there. So how do you hire a retainer? Well, first, it's going to cost referee's discretion, but it's recommended 2 silver pieces to get the word out about a job. Okay. And then, of course, retainers arrive, or would-be retainers, and then there's 3 to 4 factors that are going to determine whether the applicant takes the job and how loyal he or she is. This is the negotiation process. This is where you can't just check a chart and say, I'm paying this. Okay, I now have some laborers. No, they're going to negotiate. And it's going to be based on payment, the employer's charisma, terms of service, and living quarters for long-term employees. And there's 2 rules that get made. Whether the NPC accepts the job, and then if they do, how loyal are they? The salary will adjust these roles. If you just do the standard salary that's in the book, nothing happens. For every 50% increase above the standard, the rolls to accept the job and determine morale will go up by 1. For every 10% below standard pay, the rolls are decreased by 1. Term of service, if the employment promised is for at least 3 months, add 1 to both roles. So this may be not a this is where long-term employment kind of gets a little fuzzy, but if you think of something like this is someone who you're hiring to go out into the wilderness with, and you know it's going to be a long journey, this will ensure a job for this individual, such that they're going to be more inclined to take the work, right? But for long-term employment, you're going to be looking at the living space. Where are they going to be staying? So if you provide what the standard living space that's in the chart, no modifier. If it's half the size, there's a -2 modifier to the roll. And then for every 50% increase above standard, there's a +1 to both rolls. Okay, so the rolls. So the first roll is to determine if the NPC accepts the job. It's you roll 3d6 plus the player character's charisma modifier, and then any of these other bonuses or penalties, minuses that I just discussed. On an 11 plus, the job is accepted. And then if accepted, you roll a 3d6, add the charisma modifier and those prior modifiers, and consult a chart to see how loyal they will be. I like this. I mean, it's contract. You negotiated something, they've accepted it, and depending on how the players negotiated and what they did, it's going to affect the morale and loyalty of their retainer. So, checking morale and loyalty, when to do it. So for domestic retainers, these are like the servants, the accountant, the people who are not going to go on your adventures with you. They will check when danger occurs at the locale, at the home, or if they notice something scandalous or illegal going on. So if you have a campaign world like 1600s Europe, where magic is considered devilry, and the players have a magic user in the party, the servants might not like that. They might see that as scandalous. If your butler dies and you get a new butler, it's a change in their superior for the servants, right? So that might cause a check to be made. And then, of course, if you ask your retainer to do something outside of what the contract requires, that will cause a morale and loyalty check. You know, don't have your servants, attacking whatever the guards are supposed to be fighting, I guess. All right, so those hired to do dangerous work have interesting morale checks as well. So if there's an opportunity to profit at their employer's expense, like they found some treasure, maybe they'll try to pocket something. You have to check morale and loyalty. I really like that. It adds an interesting dynamic to the NPC PC dichotomy there. Obviously, if you ask your hireling to do something obviously dangerous, like testing a trap, poking the chthonic entity to see if it's asleep, that kind of thing, that's going to prompt a morale loyalty check. And then morale that gets checked in combat, which I'll discuss when we get to the encounters and combat section of the book. So, and then of course for all jobs, if the servant's employer is not clearly the one behind the orders, in other words, if fighter A hires the link boy and magic user party member is ordering the link boy around, he's probably going to be entitled to a morale check to see if he's actually going to do the task ordered. And then what happens when there is a loyalty or morale check failure? That's up to the referee's discretion. Some of the examples in the book include an accountant skimming off the top, maybe the servants, seeing something scandalous and illegal, alert the authorities. The guards could leave their post, run away from whatever conflict is about to hit the house, that sort of thing. So, referee's discretion in that regard. Okay. Property and finance. It's a short section to give the players options for owning property to store their wealth. Like I said before, it's not about politics and power management. Just some real basic rules for keeping property. So one gold piece per month for food and other essential supplies. There's a D6% annual uh, tax of sorts or cost for simple maintenance. Increased to 1D10% if no accountant, and increased another 1D4% if no handyman. See how those hirelings are all of a sudden seeming very important. There's also an annual tax, 1D4 plus 3% per year. Add another 1D10% if no accountant. Accountants apparently getting a lot of love in James Radji's book here. Um, there's also rules in covering investment opportunities, maybe investing into a merchant house or a business. Um, and it's handled very abstractly, basically on an annual, once the player invests a certain amount of money, annually you'll make a series of rolls based on how stable or wild or risky the investment is. So if it's a stable investment, 1d8 minus 4% per year. A wild investment will grow 1d 100% minus 50% per year, and you can add a 1d 10% if there's an accountant on staff. If positive, the roll is positive, PC gets the amount. If negative, the overall investment is decreased, and there's no money earned or received by the player. Now, what I think is really cool is that the amount of return can explode either positively or negatively. So if you roll the max amount, you roll again, and you keep rolling until you stop rolling the max amount. Same thing if it's a minimum number. So the market could go wild and the players could lose it all or win it all. Um, so it's an interesting little mechanic. So can only withdraw money at the time of the annual return. Otherwise, if they do it before then, there's a 1d6 plus 4% penalty, and taxes are included in this calculation when you're deducting your investment returns. Now, there's also a chance for bankruptcy. This is just an annual roll that goes along with everything else. If it's a stable investment, 5%, risky investment, 10%, and wild investment, 25% chance. And they just lose everything, and that's it. It's done. There really is no description of a stable, risky, or wild investment. That's going to be up to the referee's discretion. I suppose you could extrapolate based on your campaign world and what you sort of see how the economy works in your campaign world. If you think of the 17th century, which is the default campaign world for Lamentations of the Flame Princess, someone offering to set sail and open new business ventures in faraway land, that would be pretty risky, possibly wild, right? But a bar owner, a longtime bar owner in a wealthy and prosperous city is probably pretty stable, So you'll just have to think about it. So, a final word on these sections. Is this too simulationist? Maybe. I don't know. Sometimes I think the word simulationist is used as a pejorative in RPGs. I kind of like it when you have a little bit of realism, especially when the rules, it's more than just some sort of abstract role playing element. There's an actual game mechanic behind it. I think it helps with immersion. And these rules are deceptively immersive. Like, if you have players who are very serious about their property management and they hire an accountant, that NPC is going to become incredibly important. The accountant of all people, or their handyman, right? So I think it's deceptively immersive, and I think that's great. I think that's a good thing. It also underscores the um, living world aspect of what's going on in a tabletop RPG. There's stuff going on outside the player's little adventuring bubble. Your players may not care, and that's one thing, but the world is living, and it should be living, and these rules really help that. Your NPCs are gonna be negotiating their contracts. You got a henchman that says, "Hey, I want to join you on your quest into the Temple of Elemental Evil." Well, I got a mom and dad that need to be taken care of if I die. I want my share of the treasure going to them. I have a child on the way, and I need to make sure they're taken care of. So I think this is great, and I think it's smart and doesn't treat it sort of offhandedly like in the well, I'm more familiar with second edition rules on retainers and whatnot, and those were not given the detail that I feel like Lamentations has given retainers and property management. So, anyway, that's it. I think this is a pretty quick video. I hope it was quick. Um, Lamentations of Elemental Evil is still going, but if you're into actual plays, please check it out. We're having a good time. I really feel like the party and myself are starting to gel, and it's becoming a real fun game. I look forward to playing it every Thursday night. I haven't written anything new in the blog yet. I've been trying to come up with a topic. I've been meditating on death. It's kind of morbid, I know, but be on the lookout on that. I'm not entirely sure when I'm going to have that ready to go. But and then finally, totally unrelated to Lamentations of the Flame Princess, I'm working on a uh, weird Wild West horror. Western horror supplement for cowpunchers, written by John Torres. That's going to be coming out in the next week or so. I'm doing the layout for it right now. It's been slow going. I'm a family man. I got a job, so trying to find time to work on it takes time. But uh, I will let you all know when that is published. And other than that, thanks for watching. Click like, subscribe, bell icon. You know the drill. Until next time, take it easy.